for that compilement. And I said one of them was to enter into conversations that are going on amongst thinkers. Not that I'm one, but I wouldn't mind joining some others who are in the modern world who are contemplating the purpose of life or how to improve oneself in life. And I realized today that although I didn't give it a lot of practical thought at that time how it would happen, it's been happening for the last couple of years. Since I wrote the book called The Four Questions, we've used that as a calling card to enter into conversations that are going on in academia and science and philosophy, self-help, and so forth. And people take it seriously when you compile something, when you take the time to write something down and present it to the world shamelessly. And so we've been in some conversations. There turns out there are some people who are thinkers who are eager to talk. So today we're going to present some of the nexus points that we've been finding with various luminaries in various fields in psychology. Several are in psychology, some are in astrophysics. And we'll talk about their findings and approaches to science and investigating their niche in science and trying to come up with answers for a better life with the Bhagavad Gita. And I find some of the crossover points to be profound, and apparently so do they, because we're continuing conversations with them and finding that cross-disciplinary conversations can be very fruitful. So a few things like that today. And again, welcome all of you who are joining and keeping the conversation going. Someone gave me a hat. I have this phrase that I picked up years ago from a friend of mine when we were moving from one activity to another in our spiritual practice. And there was a 10-second lull in the middle of transitioning from one thing to the next. And my friend said, keep the transcendental vibration going. And I said, I wrote that down. And that became a guiding phrase for me in my life. And I had somebody put it on a hat for me. I'm not going to go over and grab it. I've done that before, but I was wearing that hat on the plane on the way home from India recently, and somebody who was, I was already sitting and people were filing on the plane, walking by me. Some person, a passenger, turned to me and said, "Hey, I like the hat. That's a good idea." And I remembered what it said there because sometimes I forget. And so this idea of keeping the transcendental vibration going has a lot to do with conversation. There are lots of conversation going on in the world. Many of them are about the proverbial bottom line, like how will this sell? But the most important conversations have to do with our ultimate good in life. This comes out in one of the greatest conversations of all time in the book called Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the quintessential book on the practice of bhakti yoga, or the yoga of love and devotion. And in it, there's a sage named Sutta, and there's a seminar. He'd been elected to speak to a group of other sages about the ultimate purpose of life, and they begin by asking him questions. And then he lauds their questions, saying, your questions are worthy because they relate to the ultimate goal of life, and therefore they're extremely important. So some questions are more important than others. And the opportunity to have conversations where we ask questions boldly about higher topics, higher means, what's my ultimate good, for instance? I mean, we can ask about what my immediate good is, where I'll find the cheapest groceries or something like that. Not that that's not important. Apparently it is. But Then there's the ultimate questions. How did I get here in the first place? What's the ultimate purpose of life? Where am I going after I drop this mortal coil by the wayside somewhere? And those questions are deeply penetrating. And one of the optimistic aspects of the ancient wisdom literatures like Bhagavad Gita is that there are answers to these questions. And so that's why we're having this ongoing conversation, success sadhana. Part of the practice is to keep asking and keep discussing. And it could do the world good to widen the conversation. So the more people talking about the ultimate good, better everyone will do together. JM, thanks for keeping the lights on. I'd like to look briefly at the end of the presentation today. In fact, it's past the end. If you could turn to slide number 13, that's past even where it says reflections. I just want to talk for a moment about the practice of bhakti yoga and one of its main tenets, which is mantra. Man means mind and tra means to deliver. And mantra meditation means to fix one's mind on a potent sound source. What we mean by potent sound source is that not all sounds are equal. Some are random and ineffectual or not important or even disturbing. A cacophony describes a mixture of sounds, which in some contexts may mean that they're not helpful. For instance, as an example, when I notice when I'm abroad, especially in India, there's a customary way in which people honk their horn for various reasons. Not like in America, you honk your horn when you're mad at somebody, but in India, you honk your horn just to let people know that you're alive and behind the wheel, apparently. And when you hear all of that together, every city I go to, I hear a cacophony, various pitches of horns honking. That's not necessarily um, beneficial. In fact, if I was elected Emperor of India, I'd first make an edict, no more horn honking, just wave. Um, so potent sound sources, there are, uh, according to the science, there are sounds that come from a higher realm, and those get encapsulated in mantras. It's kind of like a zip file. And when you chant the mantra, there's a way in which your mind has recourse. It has a place to take refuge. And what's more, the mantra has some power. Let's look at the next slide on mantra. Giving examples of some mantra. Nitai Gauranga, we've chanted that one before. The next one. This is the Hare Krishna mantra. Krish means the whole of existence. It also means attraction in Sanskrit. Na means one who ends material suffering. It also is part of the word ananda, which means bliss. Rama means enjoyment arising from spiritual existence. And Hare, not pronounced hare like a rabbit, but Hare, the spiritual energy of the original conscious source. And if you go to the next one, Om, it's also a mantra, which is a vibration that encompasses everything. It includes every aspect of creation. So it's sort of a source mantra. So there are various mantras that one can take advantage of. I mentioned that in the beginning because, well, I live with something, my wife. We've been married for 36 years, and something I found out about her early on is when she reads a book, she reads the last page first because she doesn't like surprises. She wants to know what's going to happen before she reads the book. I'm just the opposite. But in this presentation today, I'm just giving the last part first in case we run out of time. And also just to keep in mind that there are practices by which one can attain equanimity and other such qualities. The mind needs a refuge. So man means mind, tra means refuge or deliverance. And so there's a way in which there's a regular practice by which if one applies oneself, one can experience levels of transcendence through the practice of mantra meditation. Enough said, probably, right? For revealing one aspect of the practice before we get to the beginning of the conversation. And so let's talk about that. So the name of the conversation today is the guided mind. So the implication here is back to the beginning. So the mind can also be unguided, obviously. And this is a verse I pulled out of the Srimad Bhagavatam, from way into the Bhagavatam, 11th canto. There's 12 cantos altogether. And it says here, all the senses have been under the control of the mind since time immemorial. And the mind himself never comes under the sway of any other. He is stronger than the strongest, and his godlike power is fearsome. Therefore, anyone who can bring the mind under control becomes the master
Mm,
of all the senses.
mm,
So there's a way in which the mind is a primary topic in all forms of yoga, whether it be the yoga of knowledge, otherwise known as jnana yoga. We become aware of causality and perspective by studying the nature of all the energies of the world and studying the nature of ourselves. We're also energy, and according to the Bhagavad Gita, and noticing the difference between the energies and so forth. That gives us context through which we become aloof and less reactive in the world. As we see that the ways I'm reacting to circumstances are determining future results and so forth. And then there's this karma yoga. Karma yoga, which Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad Gita, has to do with the purpose for which we work. We may work for different reasons, have different kinds of um, desires for outcomes. And there's a practice of yoga through which one works without expectation of result. May mean like selfless action, or you're working and not being attached to the fruit. That could include working out of duty and also working out of devotion. You're doing something out of love for a higher purpose. You're dedicating your work because you want to serve somebody. Those are different than being attached to the fruits of your work, and they give us a sense of there's a fruit, just sense of perspective, detachment that comes through working in that way. And then there's bhakti yoga, which is yoga of love. When we come to understand the benevolence of our source and our connection with source, and that it's a personal connection on both sides, then there's a development of gratitude, which can lead to ever deepening feelings of affinity and love. And it's bhakti yoga. So, in any case, in all of these practices, there's an emphasis on controlling the mind. So the mind is called the sense within. We have various senses. In fact, think of it just for a moment. Can we come back to the room just for a sec? Think of it for a moment that your body is a conglomeration of senses. And you just, if you have your self view on, you can look at yourself because it's kind of like a mirror. And you can notice that although we look in the mirror and think, I wonder how I look, if you look in a more of a objective way and just think, what are the collection of senses I have here, 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 grouped about the face? They're there for gathering information. Those are called Gyanendriya. Indriya means senses, and Gyan Indriya means These are meant for getting information, and so's the tactile sense. It's amazing how adept the hand is. If you're ever driving, don't try this at home, but and you're trying to pull something out of the bag, your hand can go and they go, oh, that's it. And they're like, how did I know that? It's a very informative touch. And then there are working senses like the hands and the legs and the elimination system and so forth. So these are all categorized. And then there's a clearinghouse for all the information that comes through these senses and a way of organizing our working senses that comes from the mind. And the mind is called the sense within. And so one of the keys to happiness in life, or I could say the key to happiness in life, is bringing the mind to equanimity. What does it mean? It means it comes from the word equal. And how would this be achieved? Well, of course, people talk about this all the time, don't they? They say it's not what happens to you. Now, you could even finish my sentence because you know what I'm going to say. It's about how you react to what happens to you. Because I'll keep going and you'll recognize the pattern of speech. It's the same things happen to us all, but then it's up to us how we react to them. So this reaction depends on our state of mind. We act in certain ways. If, let's say, have you ever been in a state of mind where you're grouchy? Shiva, you never get grouchy, right? He's always smiling. I doubt if he's ever grouchy. But if you've ever been in a grouchy state of mind and somebody looks at you the wrong way and say, what? What? Like, what do you mean, what? I just looked at you. I didn't do anything. So the mind reacts in various ways according to its state at any given moment. So one of the ways in which a controlled mind is defined is that it becomes equal in various circumstances. You may get so-called good news or so-called bad news, and I say so-called because an equal mind sees categorically that the world is just going through changes, and whatever we consider up or down, Krishna says victory or defeat, loss, gain, pebbles, stone, gold, you see it all as the same. So this is the equal mind, and we react with grace. When we feel grace in our heart, that is, that we feel connection to the higher realm, to the divine, which is really what spiritual practice is about. We want something more than just tactile experience in this world. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna certifies that tactile happiness is no happiness at all because it has a beginning and an end. There is a kind of happiness that comes from the self, which is beyond the body. And the highest sense of happiness comes with the self in connection, communion with the higher self. So that's real yoga. Yoga means to combine, uh, to connect. And so when the mind becomes equal to all the changes in the world, considering categorically that they're simply various actions and reactions. And whether we call them good or bad, they're all basically the same thing. They're just movements of the external energy. And the main concern of a yogi is uh, connecting his or herself to the Supreme Self. And in that, there's a sense of unlimited happiness, especially when there's a development of love, and that's bhakti. So now let's talk a little bit about the things I advertised so far, which is that in conversation with various thinkers who are in various disciplines, we're finding nexus points. So across neuroscience, cognitive science, lived scientific practice, and the Gita, there's four categories to consider there. We've compiled a few for as samples. Main points. One is that equanimity does not mean caring less, it means reacting with grace. The second is reacting with grace brings enhanced outcomes and steadier relationships. And practicing Notice the word, it's a practice. Equanimity brings wisdom as our measured reactions bring the fruits of ever deepening insight. Benefit-based marketing. Equanimity pays. Let's see the next one. The guided mind. This is also one of the main concepts of yoga, is the mind needs guidance. And of course, we're finding that people who use their minds a lot, some people don't really attend to it that much. You can surrender your mind to to others and not use it. That's possible. But here we're finding uh, universal principles. One is the mind isn't broken, it's unguided. Another is that equanimity is something you practice, not something you wait for. Disciplined tolerance doesn't confine the mind, it frees it. That's something to think about because it seems counterintuitive, but if you think about the word discipline itself, it comes from Latin. It's a word which means learner. What do we learn from our experiences? Well, a lot. And when we have disciplined tolerance, means that we're doing it deliberately, tolerating various circumstances. And of course, there's lots of caveats we can add. No, it doesn't mean that you become a doormat for the world to tolerate whatever happens to you. Unless you happen to be what's called an avaduta, and that's a whole different thing. Avaduta just gives up the world, doesn't care about it. But that's not a very common thing. Anxiety grows when we lose control and forget the context of our life. We lose context. We forget we're in a universe. In fact, a friend of mine was telling me yesterday that he had a transrational experience once on a dark moon night when he was standing on the seashore. There was no light pollution whatsoever. He turned off his car lights and stepped out onto the beach. The stars were so pronounced that he felt himself separate from his body and felt the power of the universe. Of course, we're in a universe which is practically inexplicable, and there are various powers, forces that are working on us all the time. But we can forget that. And in various contexts, we may just think that I am uh, a worker bee, I'm a little cat, or I'm a dog, and we care about our territory on the block. And in human life, we can also develop such limited perspectives. And then we get anxious about it. But when we widen our perspective and think about who we are in the context of the greater universe, we can come to a sort of equanimity through which anxiety reduces. And then finally, equanimity lets you care without being shaken. You can still care, you still have empathy, but you're actually more useful because you don't become overwhelmed by various circumstances because your perspective is so deep. Okay, I am at some particular time, just warning you, going to stop talking before the end of the hour and ask for reflections. So they could be coming at any time. Please be prepared, or my request can come at any time. One of the academics that we're in conversation with, ongoing, is Dr. David Cresswell. He teaches contemplative neuroscience, which includes mindfulness meditation, the measuring of the effects on our bodies and minds physically, how, for instance, mindfulness or meditation affects our health, mental health, physical health, and so forth. And there's lots and lots of data about that he's collecting, and he's very much absorbed in that. That's his department and his uh, niche. So here are a few, and there's lots more. These just samplings of some of his thoughts in speaking to him. Cresswell's research shows that equanimity Non-reactivity and open awareness is the active mechanism behind meditation's stress-reducing effects. So he tries to measure stress on a biological level, has a lot to do with cortisol, and there are noticeable ways, as we all know, biofeedback and so forth can show you how your body's reacting to your mind. Also, when attention is trained, not suppressed, cortisol reactivity drops. When equanimity training is removed, the benefits disappear. That's why he's writing a book about equanimity right now, because he found that it's one of the core practices that brings measurable results. So a claim he makes is the mind doesn't naturally self-regulate under stress. It requires guided attention to stabilize. So that's why we're talking about this, because if we're aware of the effect the mind has on our body, in fact, there's a feedback loop. If you've ever been in a circumstance where you perceived some danger in your mind and then your body reacted to it, and then because your body reacted to your mind says, yes, it must be true, and then it intensifies. You get caught in that. Either on an ongoing basis, there's a low-level anxiety that's always flowing through your mind, or it can be at peak experiences where cortisol peaks in your body and become overwhelmed by circumstances. So again, his claim is the mind doesn't naturally self-regulate under stress. It requires guided attention to stabilize. Speaks well for the practice of meditation, mantra, meditation, so forth, to bring one's mind to a regulated state and bringing and practicing equanimity. Let's look at another view of the mind. We're in conversation with Stephen Sloman from Brown University. He's in cognitive science. He's a psychologist. From his books and from our conversations with him, here are a few extracts. His book called The Knowledge Illusion, and he also has The Inference Machine. Sloman shows that the mind is not a self-contained control center. Humans rely, there's a continuation of that thought, humans rely on external structures, tools, and shared systems to think clearly. Unguided cognition defaults to shortcuts and reactivity. So his claim, to tie that together, because it may still sound enigmatic, expecting the mind to manage everything internally is a cognitive mistake. So his point of view is slightly different, yet he talks about the importance of controlling the mind. He opines that we're very much dependent, look at that picture that somebody's holding up there, with those around us. In fact, in the knowledge illusion, he points out that we don't know that much about the world or any specific thing in it. We depend on others to have a conglomeration of knowledge that guide us through most of our lives. And this speaks well to one of the practices of bhakti yoga. I already mentioned chanting mantra, but there's a system of chanting called sankirtan. San means together, and kirtan means to chant mantra. And there's an age-old process when participants who are interested in achieving equanimity and spiritual consciousness come together and chant together in a group. It's call and response. This is a very potent form of meditation, and there's a neat parallel between what Stephen Sloman talks about in his books about how dependent we are on others and the effectiveness of this sankirtan or group chanting, where together people meditate at the same time through the call and response method of meditation. Would you like to see one more person that we're talking to? Dr. Avi Loeb. He has a project that's well funded where he's looking for communication from any extraterrestrial life in the universe. He's a well-established mainstream scientist, but he has a lot of insight into the mind and equanimity. And here are some of his points. He models calm clarity under uncertainty. His approach to science is that we have to be curious and humble. He stays open to disruptive data without becoming defensive or reactive. I found that very much parallel with ideas of the yogis. Disruptive data. Have you ever gotten any disruptive data in your life? I mean, you're sailing along having a perfectly nice afternoon. After all, if you're here in California, especially the Bay Area, you can't beat this weather. And then somebody might just say, oh, by the way, somebody called and said this or this and that becomes disruptive data in your mind. Uh, doesn't appreciate anything anymore for at least a while. Could be a few days, could be a few minutes, but disruptive data. So he recommends in the process of inquiry, even in empirical science, he says stay open to disruptive data without becoming defensive reactive, because he also claims that people in scientific research become territorial and they hold on to their hypotheses despite contrary indications and data that contradicts what they're saying. They just try to hold on to it. Let go, be equal, be open. His stance shows that guidance by method, data, repeatable inquiry, the mainstays of empirical scientific study, prevents emotional overreaction and high stakes uncertainty. This is a way of staying in equanimity. Don't be attached. Take whatever data comes and don't become attached to it on a personal level. It's very much the same as, or it has some parallel to what I talked about before, working out of duty without being attached to the results and so forth. And a claim is kind of a summarization of some of his thoughts are that unguided thought breeds anxiety. Disciplined frameworks create steadiness. In other words, if you have a system, stick to it. A well-vetted system, a well-thought-out system, stick to it. They say that in investing. You got to have a system and stick to it, whether the market goes up or down. That's investing 101. If you react to every market and try to time the market and freak out when the market goes down, you end up buying high and selling low. Big mistake people make. And in life also, if we're not tied to a discipline, then we can't stay equal in all circumstances. We have to have a philosophy of life. Like, here's a philosophical statement. Somebody hits your car and then your friend says, oh, it's just a car. That's some profound philosophy. It's just a car. Because I'm thinking it's my car and now I'm agitated. But there are ways in which we can rise above through our enhanced perspective, our normal disruptive thought patterns that come by not having a well thought out, disciplined framework for our lives. Now, after that barrage, the diatribe, maybe something sailed through to the 32 attendants on here, or 31 since I'm one of them. Uh, anything that sailed through, a phrase, concept, a word that stuck with you, Radha.
Yeah, I have a question actually. So some people are very sensitive to destructive data, because of their nature. What is the best way to deal with that scenario?
It is to practice equanimity. And the various practices of equanimity have to do with being observant of the patterns of the mind. As Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, and I'll get into that in a minute in the slideshow, one has to remain steady despite the changes that go on in the world. And that's a practice. So you have to know ahead of time that you're going to be observant and curious. That's a word that Cresswell uses about the way your mind's reacting, which gives you an advantage. The advantage is that you can be aloof from your mind because if you're noticing what it's doing, instead of being carried away by it, then you're not part of it. You're not obligated to act in a particular way. So what to do is to practice equanimity by being observant and curious about the way the mind reacts to certain things. We don't try to suppress it because whatever you resist persists, but you notice it and analyze it and see it. The other way is through the practice of ongoing meditation. If you have daily practice of meditation and you have this awareness that whatever's going on in your mind is not you, just as the weather is not you. And the weather changes, so does your mind. And you're able to be aloof in that way. And I also mentioned mantra meditation. The idea there is that you have a way to regulate the mind to the sound of the mantra. What's more, the mantra has, according to the theory of mantra, it has its own power that helps to lift you above the consternation that comes from loss and gain, victory and defeat, and so forth. Well, maybe not in victory, but uh, the the overreaction to what's happening in the world. Sundar.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Oh, there you are.
Thank you for your nice points.
Thanks for your presence.
I had a very similar point to what Prabhu was saying about disruptive data and how to basically react to it. Uh, at least my reflection on some of your discussion is that I feel there is a lot of preparation that's required to be able to handle disruptive data, and depending on the intensity of the disruptive data. And I have to honestly admit, I feel unprepared for such disruptive data. And so I like the point which you alluded in your response to Radha Kripa's question is that the daily practice is the preparation, and where you actually try to realize that you're an observer and you're not your mind. And I think that kind of an aloofness, at least to some extent, I think will help you to be more methodical and, as you say, and dispassionate in dealing with things. Anyway, those are some reflections I had.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's important to emphasize that this is not easy peasy. You just like do it. You have to practice. And how much do you have to practice? A lot. So you may ask the same question about violin. How come I can't play the violin? I can't play the violin. I'm going to come clean right now. Can't play it. I didn't even have one. But if I picked one up, people would flee because I've never played a violin and it's going to be discordant for a long time until learn to play one note, which may take me 2 years to play one clean note, unless I'm Kai Valiabalova, who learned the whole violin in 1 year for some reason. I can't understand that. But in any case, controlling the mind's an instrument. You have to learn to play it. You have to learn how it works. And this is fascinating. It's not drudgery. Drudgery means being subjected to the mind. Remember the first quote I gave? The mind has fearsome godlike powers, and it's only for the sake of the mind but that we've been put in adverse situations, one life after another, indicating the continuum of life after this body. And the mind goes with us. It's the software, and if it's got a bug in it, you have to stop and fix it. You can't just say, I'm going to get new hardware. It's still going to come along with it. So it takes a lot of work. And for those who decide to work on it, adversity is not detrimental to life's happiness, to their lives' happiness, because they see it as an opportunity to practice equanimity. I had listed out of the various qualities that we talked about, values. Remember? Remember 2025? Anybody? Were you
Mm,
there? You were there. And before 2026 came upon us, we were talking for almost a month in several forums about getting ready for 2026. And there were some thoughts about qualities that we could work on and develop. I picked equanimity. And the moment that I picked it up and said, I'm going to work on this, all the sharp edges of life became more of a fascination than they did a sense of being pricked by them. Because I thought, oh, good. here's some here's some
mm.
disturbing data. Or what did we call the data? What was the other adjective for it? Disruptive data. Here's some disruptive data. Let's see me not be disrupted. And it gave me an opportunity to practice. It really, this idea that I'm going to practice equanimity gives us kind of fascination with the way the world works. Rather than being carried away by it, we get to be the observer. And just the intention itself to look at it and watch instead of being carried away by every incident and preparing for that, as you just indicated, tuning the mind to that nice note instead of being buffeted by the various circumstances that come to us and the mind becoming disturbed. So, yes, it takes practice, and yes, it's worthwhile. And it's not just worthwhile, it's interesting. And if we remain interested in what we're going through rather than being an active participant in it and saying, this is happening to me, it's like, not exactly. Not exactly. This is one of the points that Christian makes. You could be like a lamp or a flame in a windless place when you're able to achieve this equanimity through practice. And it's not some far-fetched thing. You don't have to go to a cave. You have to just become aware of what's going on internally. Look, Panda's there. Please go ahead, Panda.
Hey guys, so yeah, I get it. When you're trying to maintain equanimity in like like small things or medium things, your car gets scratched or in your relationship breaks up or something like that. But when like in more extreme circumstances, you're in a war-torn country or every other day somebody gets blown up that you know, like how can you even get close or how can that apply there? Have a hard time imagining that
Well,
in more difficult circumstances.
there's been some extensive research on that, fortunately. And one of the researchers who practiced on himself was Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was subjected to extreme torture in Nazi concentration camps. He wrote a whole book about it. Somebody could put what the book is, and I'm sure you've heard of it. But
Yeah, man's search for meaning.
yes,
Yeah,
yes. I mean, in that, we find somebody who achieved equanimity and how he achieved equanimity amidst the most unimaginably torturous situations that a human could be presented with. First of all, being demeaned by somebody else. Second of all, physical torture and deprivation and so forth. And he points out that, okay, it's always a choice. And the most amazing things happen when one is able to come to that perspective. It's all encompassing. It's not just for, if you get a bee sting, if the bee stings when you're feeling bad, these are a few. You know, there's a existential place. that we have a standing. This is one of the points of Bhagavad Gita is actually these things aren't happening to us, they're happening to our bodies. And the mind is interpreting in a certain way. When we understand who we are, that we have nothing to do with the changes of the material world. And it's not just knowing it intellectually when we experience it through our deep practice. Then, as Krishna puts it in the Bhagavad Gita, when you touch that web of the divine, there's a sense that nothing can shake you, even in the most disturbing of all circumstances, which is arguably death. I mean, some people say public speaking, but I don't believe that. It's death. He says, Dhiras tatra nimuyati, a person who has achieved equanimity through spiritual practice isn't disturbed by death. How would that happen? It's like death has to do with all my attachments. If you've already come to a conclusion that I own nothing, I appreciate everything, but I own nothing, and I utilize everything, but it's not mine. It's all Airbnb and Lyft and all that. It's not my stuff. Then there's nothing to take away at death, so one's mind isn't disturbed. So you can look at those who have examined very carefully under extreme circumstances using their free will the changes that take place and disassociated themselves with the kind of natural depression that might come when I remain attached. And the upside is this uh, observance of, oh, this is going on around me, and keeping one's center as one's existential standing place to stand, which is as the conscious entity who's within the body, who's not the body. Boy, was that a long set of sentences held together with semicolons. Panda, was there any part of that that answered your question to some degree?
Um, yeah, it just feels something that's like not in my reach in a way. It's like maybe for other super special people who can maybe get there, but
Same with the violin. I feel like it's for super special people. But I bet you if I took it up and I practiced for maybe 16 years, I could get a note out of it and say, like, okay, maybe I'm a little special. So uh, that's what human life is all about. It's about coming to this next level of being able to perceive how I'm not the body and to be able to achieve, this state. And also, I wanted to say that, in practicing anything, there are different levels. And you were saying maybe a super special person who can achieve such a state. Well, one can come to that stage by practice. That's the point that the Bhagavad Gita is making and the other wisdom literatures. You can practice to come to that point. And in the interim, I just had my own personal experience. I became a monk when I was 16. I practiced intensely for 13 years in that monkhood, and then I went out into the world, so to speak. And one of the very um, pressing questions I had, what would happen when my parents died? Because I had a close relationship with them. I thought, how will I handle that? And then it happened. And I remember how I handled it. And I saw that even though I had practiced equanimity, meditation, a lifestyle that has to do with seeing that you're not the body and so forth, I was still affected by it. However, I did have the wherewithal to process it over time. And these extreme cases, at least that was extreme for me, watching the demise of my parents, who somehow psychologically, there's a psychological umbilical cord connected. That was my observation. Still, even in those extreme circumstances, I had the tools to process it over time, and it became extremely beneficial for me to be able to process it. And so, all the experiences that we have, as conscious beings in this world can be processed through this practice and through the wisdom that comes along with it. That's the claim. And we just have to start where we are. Little successes build upon themselves into bigger ones. Thanks, Panda.
Thank you.
Okay, JM, there's stuff in the chat
Yeah.
box. We can't miss it.
Jean has posed a reflection and a question.
Oh,
Equanimity stuck with me. I like the idea of balance. I'm also wondering what is the difference between mantra meditation and silent meditation and how it affects your mind.
yeah, the difference is that mantra meditation brings its own energy. So when we're alone with our mind, we learn how to detach ourselves. But mantra meditation brings an extra power, a potency that helps to lift us up and uh, charges us with a an energy, kind of like when you hit a tuning fork and then you hold on to it, and the second tuning fork you'll hear is continuing to vibrate. The mantra, because of its vibrational force, it's a spiritual vibration, it resonates with our higher self and it helps to lift us. And so we get that added power through the mantra. What else, JM?
We have Eka who shared a reflection. The discussion reminds me of Bhagavad Gita 4.18. One who sees action in inaction, and inaction in action is intelligent and transcendental even when performing activities. My thought is that overreacting without reflection is actually inaction, whereas maintaining equanimity is an advanced action.
Yeah, very interesting observations. And the ways that we move in the world are dictated by the mind and how we react to it. And Jean said, I've started attending kirtan. It is wonderful. So just to say the kirtan means a group chanting, and that has powerful effect. We were comparing that to Dr. Sloman, who talked about how dependent we are on our association, everyone around us. It adds to our sense of knowingness in the world. JM, I have a couple more slides. What do you think? Can we make it? Bhagavad Gita, just some samplers from Bhagavad Gita. One must elevate oneself by the mind. The mind can be one's friend or enemy. The senses forcibly carry away the mind, even of a wise person striving for perfection. Wherever the restless mind wanders, one should gently bring it back under control. The claim, the mind left alone becomes reactive. Steadiness comes from gentle, repeated guidance, not force. And a nexus, some of the points that cross over in these various disciplines, across neuroscience, cognitive science, applied science, the Gita. The mind is not defective, but unguided. The mind can become a great friend when it gets proper guidance. Equanimity emerges, and we could also say it's defective. So we can amend that a little bit, because when it acts against us, it's in a defective mode. So we can think about that more. Equanimity emerges when attention is supported by structure. This goes to the practice of the violin. You need to practice half hour a day, Willie. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to play a note. Practice, method, rhythm, or discipline. These are tenets of bhakti yoga, any kind of yoga. You have to have some structure. It's called vaidhi, some guidance to put the mind on the right track until it gets spontaneously going in the right direction. And finally, guidance doesn't weaken freedom. It makes inner stability possible in a world designed to scatter our attention. About Bhakti Yoga, quick comment. It's structured daily practice that leads to a happy, effective mind. That's a kind of pithy advertisement for Bhakti Yoga. Meditation on mantra is the medicine for the mind. The word med means to take appropriate action. The mind needs a remedy for its errant ways. And group meditation, Sankirtan brings augmented results for meditation. Try it as soon as you can. It's very powerful. That's all, folks. And do you have any 2-minute thoughts? 30-second thoughts? Rikesh.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, that was such a beautiful lecture, exactly what I needed to hear. One reflection possibly a question that I had was, I feel like mind tries to go the easy route. So when there's a vacuum, or when I don't know what to do, then because of past impressions, I know that giving into my attachments, I feel a certain sense of shelter. I feel like everything is okay. And actually, that leads to more agitation. And down the line, I realized that. So, in those weaker moments, how to get the mind to make the right choices instead of getting it to take shelter of false attachments. I mean, I really like the point where you said by gentle guidance, not yanking it out. So if I try to yank it out, there's a lot of protest. So how do we make that transition in making the right choices?
Well, one practical point is that chanting the mantra is very, see, at hand, I can reach over. I'm reaching right now. What do I have? I have my bag. It's got beads in it. I walk around my neighborhood with this. Sometimes people stop me and say, "What's in the bag, man?" I was like, "These are prayer beads. What are you praying?" And I tell them. And I find that in any confused state or any agitation that's there in my mind, taking the mantra, it's not an intellectual process. It's a visceral process. You chant and you feel, okay, I have shelter here. And then the mind, the mind, the mind's delivered by the mantra. That's why it's outside power. So I recommend that. It's very helpful to have a regular practice mantra, count the number you do every day and stay at a steady state, and then have your beads or whatever implement you use to chant on hand. And it becomes your shelter that something you can resort to. And when you find yourself adrift or overwhelmed, you need a higher power. So it comes from the mantra. Great question, Rakesh, and everybody else. Thank you for your contributions today. Thanks for your presence. It was fantastic to be here with you. And obviously, it's an ongoing, unfolding conversation. And we'll talk a little bit more about equanimity as we go forward. But hopefully, there's some takeaway so you can practice it. Do try to practice this at home. In fact, try to find something today that disturbs you, some disturbing data, and either chant or remember what we talked about equanimity, stepping back and observing what's happening rather than becoming a participant. Become curious about what's going on in your own mind. And in the moment you become curious, you become the observer and you're no longer directly involved. You don't have to be dragged in. Om Tat Sat. You know, JM, I was thinking about a suitable way to say goodbye to everybody here, even though I don't want to go, because I just want to keep talking. But I thought what I've seen our friends in the Himalayas do, those yogis who sit in caves, they're generally very peaceful, but they get a little enthusiastic when they see their colleagues high in the mountain peaks who are also fellow meditators. They put their hands high in the air, palms facing outward, and they say Hari Bol. Keep the transcendental vibration going. As many of them are doing mantra. I thought that might be a good way to go. Nirali's into it. She just turned her camera on. Let's try it on 3. 1, 2, 3. Hari Bol.
Haribol.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon.